Hello everyone. Today, we're diving into the darkest pages of military history to explore five of the deadliest sieges ever documented. Besieging a large city or fortified position is usually a far less costly strategy for the attacker than a direct assault, where fortifications and narrow streets can turn an attack into a risky and bloody proposition. Starving the defenders into submission can eliminate the need for such carnage. However, the consequences for the besieged can be nothing short of horrific. Disease, hunger, thirst, and bombardments slowly wear down those trapped inside, inflicting casualties on a scale more terrible than even the deadliest battles. In just 3 months, 250,000 people would perish in a siege that witnessed levels of brutality shocking even the battle-hardened Spanish conquistadors. Estimates vary between 100,000 and 240,000 deaths, transforming one of the world's greatest cities into a mass graveyard. The Aztec Empire counted more than 6 million inhabitants spread across 500 states. This wealth in gold attracted men from across the ocean, including Hernán Cortés, an ambitious Spaniard who destroyed his ships after landing to eliminate any possibility of retreat. Cortés quickly discovered his enemy's weaknesses. The Aztec Empire was held together by military force and, above all, fear. A massive undercurrent of resentment simmered beneath the surface. Hundreds of tribes had been violently subjugated by the Aztecs, forced to pay endless tributes and provide sacrificial victims. The siege lasted 93 days, from May 22nd to August 13th, 1521. Cortés had assembled a horde of perhaps 100,000 indigenous allies. The city had already been ravaged by smallpox, killing up to 50% of the population and fatally damaging Aztec fighting potential. Without access to food, water, or reinforcement supplies, the Aztecs grew weaker by the day. They were forced to drink filthy water and eat leather and wood, driven mad by hunger. The final massacre in the central marketplace marked the end of the Aztec Empire and the beginning of New Spain. 2,000 years ago, a series of relatively minor riots over unfair taxation and religious tensions escalated into an all-out rebellion against Roman rule. What began as local unrest in 66 AD resulted in one of the most complete destructions in history. Religious and ethnic tensions between Romans and Jews erupted into localized riots. The Roman governor of Judea attempted to restore order, but his actions only made the situation worse. After his forces plundered the Jewish temple and arrested several prominent Jewish citizens who were later publicly whipped and crucified, a province-wide rebellion erupted. Shocked by the loss of a legion, Rome sent General Vespasian with a force of about 60,000 men. His son Titus received 4 legions totaling 60,000 soldiers to conduct the final siege. Titus surrounded the city with 4 legions and a massive wall to prevent rebel supplies from getting through. He cynically allowed religious pilgrims to enter the city to celebrate Passover, but wouldn't let them leave, further straining supplies. The siege lasted 7 long months. Inside, famine became so severe that many were forced to eat leather and even excrement, with tales of cannibalism becoming chillingly common. When the Romans finally broke through the defenses, they began a 10-day massacre. Even Solomon's temple was destroyed by fire. Those who survived the carnage were sold into slavery, many dying in gladiatorial arenas. A century of warfare between two of the world's most powerful empires reached a final and bloody conclusion with a 3-year siege of the city of Carthage that saw most of its 400,000 inhabitants massacred and burned in its ancient streets. Before this titanic clash of civilizations, Carthage had flourished for over 600 years thanks to its powerful navy, which enabled its people to build a trading empire stretching from North Africa to Spain, Sardinia, and the island of Sicily. What became known as the Punic Wars was some of the largest conflicts mankind had ever seen. The First Punic War broke out in 264 BC, resulting in Roman victory and Carthage's humiliation. The Second Punic War began in 218 BC and lasted 17 years of vicious fighting, during which up to 600,000 men would perish. It was this war that saw the legendary Carthaginian general Hannibal undertake the seemingly impossible task of marching a 100,000-man army, including 37 massive war elephants, across the treacherous Alps. Despite humbling their old adversary, the Romans were not a people prone to forgive and forget. Hatred of the old enemy remained at all levels of Roman society. A massive Roman force landed in North Africa in 149 BC, demanding that Carthage surrender all their weapons and hand over 300 children of the nobility as hostages. Faced with the final ultimatum to surrender the city itself or be destroyed, the Carthaginians opted for defiance. Secure behind their 60-foot walls but cut off from outside supplies, the 90,000 Carthaginian soldiers and 400,000 civilians turned their home into a giant armory. Even children were put to work fortifying the city. Faced with such formidable resistance, the Romans were held at bay for an astonishing 3 years before finally managing to breach the city's mighty walls. The vengeful Roman army swarmed inside, slaughtering, burning, and looting their way through a city that had stood for 700 years. The victorious Roman commander rounded up the remaining 50,000 civilian survivors to be sold into slavery and issued orders that every single building and structure in the city be torn down. Insulting the Khan of the Mongol Empire is a mistake that few men have had the misfortune of making. Whether through arrogance, incompetence, or betrayal by his advisors, the Caliph of the Abbasid Empire would bring down the wrath of the Mongols upon his people, resulting in one of the largest and most horrific massacres in history. In 1242, Al-Mustasim became the 37th Caliph of the Abbasid dynasty. At the time of his rise to power, little did he know that he would also be the last. Ruling from the capital of the Caliphate, in the ancient city of Baghdad, the Caliph was the figurehead of an Islamic empire that stretched from North Africa to the Arabian Peninsula and as far as modern-day Afghanistan. Baghdad stood as one of the world's great cities, the global center of learning and culture. The Caliph's predecessors had already been in contact with the strange people known as the Mongols. Although the first Khan was now long dead, his grandsons, who now controlled the empire he had built, were no less ambitious. In 1241, Al-Mustasim received a fresh list of demands. The Khan gave him the simple ultimatum: travel in person to the Mongol capital to offer his personal submission to Mongol rule and provide military aid to the Mongol armies, or refuse and be destroyed. A cursory glance at the Mongols' track record of the previous 50 years should have been enough for the Caliph to tread carefully with his reply. However, either due to arrogance, incompetence, or poor advice from his court, he not only refused the Khan's ultimatum, but also insulted the Mongol ruler in his reply. The Mongols raised a massive army of 150,000 men, conscripting 1 out of every 10 military-age males from their population. Accompanied by 1,000 Chinese artillery experts, this terrifying force headed west with the goal of punishing the Caliph. On January 29, 1258, this terrifying force arrived at Baghdad, surrounding the city in a pincer movement that cut it off completely from outside aid. After the 30,000 defenders were disarmed and massacred outside the walls, the Mongols entered Baghdad and began a week-long orgy of killing and destruction that would end the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of civilians. The caliph himself was rolled up in a fine carpet and trampled to death by horses. Majestic buildings that had taken generations to design and construct were burned to the ground without ceremony, while the House of Wisdom, Baghdad's grand library, was also destroyed in the carnage. The terrible retribution of the Mongols had left Baghdad as a depopulated ruin, with the deep scars of the terrible siege, perhaps stretching even into the modern era. World War II's Eastern Front witnessed the largest and bloodiest battles in all of human history, with the siege of Leningrad becoming one of the longest and most lethal ever recorded. Over 872 dark days, up to 1.5 million people perished. 50% of the city's population was destroyed. Those who survived were reduced to walking skeletons clinging to life by the thinnest thread, their every thought consumed by the desire for food. With the German military machine steamrolling into Russia during its three-pronged invasion of 1941, the war plan known as Operation Barbarossa called for the 500,000-strong German Army Group North to destroy the Red Army presence in the Baltic states and capture all Soviet naval bases on the Baltic Sea before finally moving on the historic city of Leningrad. As Axis forces closed in on the city during the summer of 1941, Hitler intervened at the last minute and altered the original plan. Eager to avoid the huge casualties that would no doubt be inflicted by a direct assault, he instead decided to starve the city into submission. With the city completely encircled, food quickly ran out for its 3 million citizens. By winter, rations had been reduced to just 1/3 of the daily amount needed by an adult. Dogs, cats, birds, and rats vanished from the city as its starving people undertook a never-ending search for anything that might provide some nourishment. Many resorted to eating shoe leather and wallpaper in a futile attempt to stave off impending starvation. Worse was still to come. As the situation grew increasingly desperate, more sinister reports began to emerge. Ration cards could mean the difference between life and death, and the city's more unscrupulous individuals began resorting to murder, hiding their victims' bodies so they could draw the slain person's food rations for themselves. Others simply ate the flesh of the dead who were scattered across every corner of the city, with as many as 1,500 people arrested by police for cannibalism. Hunger was not the only hardship that people had to contend with. Oil and coal supplies ran out early in the winter, resulting in thousands freezing as temperatures plummeted. Disease spread like wildfire through Leningrad's weakened and malnourished population, killing thousands more every week. German air and artillery bombardments were incessant, often purposely targeting schools and hospitals. The suffering stretched across 872 days until Soviet troops, driving westwards, finally broke the siege in January 1944. However, despite the tide of war now finally turning, the people of Leningrad had paid a terrible price, with perhaps as much as half of the city's population perishing. These 5 sieges represent some of the darkest chapters in human history, demonstrating humanity's capacity for both cruelty and resilience. From Tenochtitlan to Leningrad, these events remind us of the terrible costs of war and the importance of remembering these lessons from history. What are your thoughts on this ranking? Are there other sieges you would have included in this list? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more historical content.